Well, okay, everybody. You can see I've cleaned up one piston. Now, I did it mostly with a razor blade, and if you put WD-40 and stuff on there, it kind of slides, doesn't scratch it so much. Of course, if you're doing a top end, you're going to be putting in new pistons, so you won't need this. What they'll do is bore the cylinder bigger and give you a little bit bigger pistons that fit it. So, but we all know I'm not doing that. So I'm saving a lot of money. But also, I'm just your average idiot, not a real mechanic. If I can do this, well, there's a chance that anybody can start fixing things themselves too. Okay, so after looking at the heads, I don't think that was where the oil was going, so I don't think it's coming down from the top. I think it's going up from the bottom. The only two places it can go, right? And I'll show you why. These two top rings that go in here, I'm going to put new ones in. See how far they stick out? They push out against the cylinder walls and make a seal on there, okay? This bottom ring here, this weird looking one, is the oil ring, and its job is to keep oil from coming up from the bottom. So, if you'll notice, when I push it, it don't stick out at all. See, it's not pushing against the cylinders anymore. I had this happen once before. So I do believe that it's coming up from the bottom, causing all that carbon inside. You see the way these pistons are black? That's the way stock pistons are black. I don't think this motor's ever been apart before. I really don't. Everything in it has been bone stock. Run fine, just using oil like a pig. Okay, now I'm going to take these rings off, and you can just take them off with your fingers like this. Really. I mean, I've done it many times. But Jody gave me this neat pair of special tool thing. We're going to see how that works. It's supposed to be just for this job. Look at that. That's nice. See, that's what they look like, huh? Just like that. Okay. So, I'm going to take them all off. And this bottom one is actually, that's going to be tricky. I think I'm going to have to do that with my fingers. This thing is actually 3 different rings. It's got a thin one on top, a thin one on bottom, and then this weird one. Like I'm always saying, I don't invent these things. Okay, there it is. Okay, now all these slots here need to be cleaned, so I'm going to take brake cleaner and a rag and just clean them out. Do the other one, and get this ready to put the new rings in it. Okay, now I've cleaned out these grooves a little bit with this little screwdriver and some of this scratch pad stuff. This stuff doesn't like scratch aluminum, so you can use it to clean it up, clean this stuff up. So now it's time to put in some rings. Okay, we're going to start with the oil ring down here, which, this one here. Okay, this funky thing gets one of these first, right? Goes in the bottom, and I'll be putting it like that. Let's see. Okay. And then it gives these little guys. These are the ones that I believe are the problem. Where are the problem? These thin ones. That thing actually gets 3 rings. Okay. There's one goes in the bottom. Oops. Okay, we got that curly Q ring there. And there's one that goes below it, and there's one that goes above it of these really thin little guys. Okay, let's try the next one. Okay. See how much further it sticks out? Sticks way out further than the other ones did. The oil ring. Okay, now, then we got second. This says these things are marked first, second, third, okay? And sometimes they have a top and a bottom. And it should be marked on it. This one's marked with a top there. Y'all can't see it, but it is. All right? So that obviously goes up. Now I want the cool tool. For these, it's going to make it easier. Okay. And then we have these ones that say top. Which don't appear to have a top and bottom. These can be curled on by hand because I've done it before. Careful with them, you don't want to break them. Okay, that puts new rings on this piston. Now, the end gaps where the two rings gap, you don't want them lined up because, well, there's compression and it'll go by it. So what you want to do is put them opposite of each other. The directions say some weird stuff on them, but really you just put one on this side and one on the other, okay? All right. Now the front and the back of the piston gets the most push because the wrist pin, the crank coming up is pushing this way and then that way. So that's why the front and the rear of the pistons, when you take them out, show the most wear. So I'm going to put the gaps in the rings on these corners like that, away from each other is what I'm going to do with it. Okay. Same with the oil rings. Okay, now I'm going to give you an idea of how this thing works. You saw the crank down inside. So what it does is the explosions push these down and it turns that crank. Okay? If I didn't have these pistons on here, I could give you a real good demonstration. I can't do it with these pistons on here. But these things have explosions and it pushes them down and they go down and they turn that crank just like I showed you over on that crank we had loose, okay? The way you check a bottom end while I'm in here is these connecting rods, if you can move them up and down at all, your bottom end shot. These are tight as a drum. So if you can move these connecting rods up and down at all, you need a bottom end. The other way that they're checked is by moving them back and forth this way. And that just shows you if they're worn. There's actually a spec for how far they can move back and forth. I don't know what it is, but these ain't moving, especially the female one. Even the male one's not moving, okay? Neither one of these moves at all. So this bottom end's really tight. I don't believe this engine has a whole lot of mileage on it. in all honesty. All right, let's move. I'm going to clean up the deck here. Put some rags around, try to keep the dirt out, just get it cleaned up and ready. Okay, I'm going to show you why the base gasket on Evos tends to leak, or at least the reason I think. Let's take a look. Okay, now, the cylinder, of course, fits over all this stuff. We're going to see that. And this here is the oil return line, okay? And it also has one of the studs coming out right next to it. And it also has a bolt here that goes through in that corner. The front one will do it sometimes too up here. I'm going to tell you what to do when you get a base gasket leak in one of these. Do nothing. It may, because you'll just fix it and it will just leak again. And so there's a fix for it. Puts a little tube in there. I've never tried it. Maybe it'll work. But here's the deal with it, is these top ends stretch, these cylinders, when they get hot. And that's why the torques on the head are very light compared to the older bikes, the cast iron ones. And when you first start it up, it's going to look like it's leaking a lot. Now, ride it a little bit and you'll notice it doesn't. Because it's stretched and it's sealed up some. If you don't like it, get some brake cleaner, just spray it off if you don't want to see it. Because you're wasting your time trying to fix it. The Evo came with two inherent flaws. It had a defective intake manifold, which they fixed, and it had this, which they never did fix. And that's about it. They didn't have any, it wasn't like the twin cam had all kind of problems when it was new, and they had to work them all out. But the Evo wasn't that way. These were its two problems. And so that's, do nothing about a base gasket leak. That's my advice. I tried fixing them. It was a waste of my time. Okay, the next thing I'm going to need is cylinder studs. Sticking out of here. Hold the cylinders on, right? Okay, now, my original studs were really corroded up, and two of them came out like this. Instead of having the nut come off, the whole thing came out. And that happened with these two in the front. And what happened was I couldn't get the cylinder out and off. I couldn't get these off because they kept hitting the frame, right? That's the stuff they probably don't teach you in school, is what do you do when things go sideways? What I had to do was put the piston all the way down, hold the cylinder up, go over to this side and take a pair of channel locks and pull the two studs out that did have the nuts come off, take them out, bend the whole thing sideways and pull it off this way. That's what I had to do. But in any case, I got these new studs because I'm going to start over with them. And we need some of them, obviously, in here. Okay, now the way these are going to go in is I have two nuts. And I'm going to put them on here. And then I'm going to... It's an old trick that's used all the time. I'm going to tighten them against each other. With these two wrenches I got. Okay. So that gives me something to turn on, okay? Then, these things get red Loctite. I've never put them on before, so this is all new to me. Put a little bit of this on. Let's put this one in right here. Does it really matter where I start? That's it. Next, we got a torque wrench. These are supposed to go to 10 pounds, which ain't much. I'm sure you could do that by hand and just feel for it. That's it there. Don't take much for these, huh? Okay, the other thing I want to point out is that these things have a shoulder on one side and not on the other. See it? So in the old books, they had you put the shoulder up. But then the problem they had was you'd put the big nuts, the long nuts on there, and they maybe didn't tighten all the way. So what they did in the later book was they had you turn them upside down. Same part number, so I'm told. And so you want to put the shoulder side down. All right, now it's just a matter of doing the other ones. Now, an important note is that these things have had problems with these studs pulling out of the cases, and once they do that, you're screwed. Now, so that's why you want to follow torque specs to what they say on this shit. So the worst years for that, I'm told, the years of the bad engine cases for these things was 1989 to 94. I don't know if that's true. A lot of my friends' cases did break back in the early 90s. I was riding an older bike at the time. But whoever Harley was having make their cases was doing a shitty job. And they were breaking all over the place, even when they were stocked sometimes. Sometimes they didn't, but often they did. Harley had what they called a silent recall, which was if your cases broke, they would give you a new set and install them for free with your numbers on them. But if they didn't break, you were on your own. This bike came with one of these studs had ripped out, been repaired, terribly repaired. They did a fucked up job, and ripped out again, and the cases were shot. I ended up putting cases in that motor, plus it had high compression pistons in it I didn't know about. I took them out at the time. This motor, however, is a 97, and it's all 97's probably a fine year. So, but we're just going to go with what they say for everything for this torque stuff. So you might want to stay away from those years. 91 was the worst. Maybe the early, I don't know if 89 to 94 is true. Probably okay with a 94, but early 90s, yeah, it could be a problem with them. So I'm going to be nice with these studs. Next thing we're going to need is some cylinders on here. Well, I could have sworn that I had video of me putting the cylinders on, but I looked everywhere, and for some reason I don't. So I'm just going to tell you how I did it. Obviously, you need to get the rings to press in against the piston so the cylinder will slide down over it. So I had a ring compressor, a special tool for it, but that's probably the first time I've ever used one. There's other ways to do it, and I'm going to tell you one that I've used many times in the past, and that is you just get a big wide hose clamp, and you put it around the piston, and you tighten it up until it holds the rings in. Then you take the cylinder and you just rub motor oil around it, and then you got to work it on down there and play with it until you get it to slide on. Another thing is you always, on these motors, you always want to use metal base gaskets, so you don't have to go through that base gasket bullshit again. They're the way to go with it. And rocker box gaskets. Now, James makes gaskets for these. Even Harley has metal gaskets for these things. And for the rocker boxes, the paper gaskets have a tendency to want to leak after a while. Now, normally I don't advocate for metal gaskets because my experience with them is you can't really use them twice. I can use a primary gasket until it falls apart if it's a paper gasket. But the metal ones, it seems like if I try to reuse them, they just leak right away. And so that's how I did it, and let's move on. All right. Let's have a look down in there. Looks pretty clean, pretty nice. A little junk there. Yeah. Compared to how it came apart, looks real nice and clean. All right, now let's go with a set of heads. I would have easily settled for stock heads, which are paper, but everybody's using these metal ones. They work fine too. And this is what I got. This is what Jody got me. These were also made by James, but they're the Cometic 3-piece style. I don't know why the hell they make them that way. Look like they are identical to me. Don't really believe there's an up or a down on them. Nope. Doesn't say nothing about it. Now, the heads do have a front and a rear, so that's not hard to not get mixed up. Let's put this one on here. Alright, there she blows. Okay, now, there's two different lengths of these. I got some new ones. Well, two new, two used, whatever. But the long ones go in the back here. But these don't get Loctite, believe it or not. They actually want you to put oil in them. The idea, and along the bottom of the heads too, of them. See here? The idea being that they want them to slide real nice and easy. I'm just using motor oil. When you hit them with a torque wrench. Okay? So that's what I'm going to do. There it is. Here you just follow the directions on the package. I don't even have a torque wrench that'll go this low. It's working. But the first torque was like 9 pounds. I ain't got a torque wrench here. They all start at like 20. Now this one starts at 10. Okay. Last one is 38 pounds. 38 to 42. I'm going to go 38. I think this Craftsman torque wrench better, but it don't go low enough for me to have used it before. That's it. Okay, now the torque on these, according to the book, is 20 pounds for the big ones, 18 pounds for the little ones back there. Okay, but I don't think I can get a torque wrench in there, and I ain't never torqued them before, so I'm just going to put them down good and snug, and I'm going to use the elbow torque wrench, and I've always have done that, and it's always worked. So then we'll do the other one. I'll show you guys a little bit of that. All right, this one's going on. Uh-oh. It's going to be a problem child, too. Okay. I'm close. Oh, I get the rockers up. Got to unrock the rockers. Okay. What do you know? Okay, now the other thing I need is to get these guys in there. See, I'm trying to get them in the bottom here, huh? While I can. Let's try the other one. These are all going back the same place they came out. Alright, now I'm going to just start getting the bolts in the right places and tightening it down. And then you can see that one's up. I'll have to turn the wheel around until it comes down. That's what I like. Somebody else doing it. Okay, we had to roll the wheel around until both of these push rods were down. See, they need to go down because they push up. I showed you guys that before. And the way that actually, Ron's the one who turned it, I have the back wheel up off the ground just enough, and the spark plug's out to be able to turn it around. So that's what he had to do. These were up, bring them down to tighten up the bolts. You can see this one of them's beginning to lift, but this is already tightened down, so it doesn't matter. I'm going to show you guys how to close up a push rod tube, huh? I already put the rubber O-ring up top. If you don't put it in the head first, it seems like they always leak. You ever get these that don't want to go? Mm-hmm. There we go. Okay, that one went. Okay. Now this thing gets these in it. I'm going to put it in like that. They're all the same. And yield trick. That's it. That's how you put them together. And I'm going to do the other ones like that. Look at that, it's starting to look like a motor. Them pushrod tubes, once in a while when you put them together, they leak. You pop them open and spin them around and close them back up and they'll stop leaking. Okay, I want to tell you guys about a little procedure that is probably not in the book and it probably isn't taught in the schools. I learned it from a mechanic who was really good, who told me about it. And that is, whenever you put a valve train system back together, rather than hit the starter button, what you want to do is have the back wheel up in the air and the spark plugs out and rotate the thing over a few times by hand. Then if I've put anything together wrong, and let's say one of the valves comes and hits the piston or something, I'm not going to bend or break anything. It'll like stop and I'll know something's not right. And one time I did bend a valve. By doing something wrong years ago. So that's a little trick that I always use, and you might want to do it too. I'm going to show you guys an old intake manifold modification that everybody does. These bolts that hold the intake manifold in comes, if you can see the front one, it's an Allen head. See them? They're Allens. Those you like this. Those you can get to. But the back one's hard to get an Allen in here. And so what everybody does is changes them over to regular bolts that you can just put a wrench on, okay, from this side. Now I'm changing this one over because it came with the Allens. The factory uses the Allens. I don't think this motor here has ever been apart, except for the rocker boxes have been resurfaced on the bottom. You can see that. And the guy who sold me this motor, I got it for $1,400. And they're going for $18,000 to $2,000, so maybe because it was using a lot of oil's why, but he didn't tell me that, of course. Anyways, I ain't mad. But so he resurfaced the tops of the rocker boxes. This piece right here in the center, I could see where it'd been surfaced, either at a machine shop or on a piece of sandpaper. And when you get a rocker box that's continually leaking and you can't stop it, that's what you need to do. I've had to do it myself before in the past. And that's how I tried everything else first. I learned most of my stuff the hard way. And then finally tried resurfacing. Machine shop's got a belt that goes over a table. Most of them do. And the guy just holds the part down on that. When you lift it up, you can see the high spots and you just sand it flat again. One little tech tip here, guys. When you're hooking up your choke, if it goes in anything like this, which it probably does, okay, this piece is made out of plastic right here. Breaks real easy. Don't use a wrench on it. Just stick it in there and turn it finger tight. And you won't have to worry about breaking it. That's all it takes to hold it in place. We all broke at least one of them. Maybe you won't have to if you already know better than to use a wrench on it. I want to point out that when tightening these nuts on the exhaust flanges, you don't want to make them real tight. And the reason is because the studs break really easily on them. I broke one once, I've never broken one since. So don't go over crazy with them, and then a lot of times you can check them again. If they come loose, you tighten them up again, and then they stay. Something to know. Okay, this bike's ready to start, or to try to start it. That's why I haven't put it all the way back together yet. But before I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about break-in procedures. Now, some guys say just ride it like you would normally ride it, and others say break the motor in. Harley-Davidson has a definite break-in procedure of which I'm going to use, and a couple of things added that friends have told me. Now, I always break them in, and I have this idea that if you break a motor in easy, then it will last longer. And I just want an easy, mellow running motor that's going to start up good and go a long way. That's a quote from Panhead Billy. And so I'm going to talk about break-in procedure. Now, Harley's break-in procedure is they want you to vary the speeds for the first 200 miles. And the reason for that is when you let off the throttle, it changes the suction underneath the pistons and pulls oil up onto the cylinder walls. Now, what they tell me is those hatch marks in there have little microscopic pieces of metal sticking up out of them, and the piston rings are going to wear them off of there, and you don't want to get it too hot while it's doing that. I don't know, But you want to keep it oiled while you're breaking it in, and that's why. So, which means if you got flat roads, you got to ride down the road, let off, and then speed back up. Fortunately, I have mountain roads. They're easier here to do break-in with. The other thing Harley suggests is that you change the oil lines, or at least clean them out, and take the oil tank off and clean it out. Now, I'm not doing that on this. What I'm going to do is purge the system, run new oil all through it. I've showed that in another video I did about oil. I forget what I called it. But you can purge the system on these older ones. So I'm going to run new oil all the way through it and put new oil in. Now, Harley wants you to leave it in for 50 miles, change it, and then change it again at 200 miles. Reason for that is as these pieces are breaking themselves in, the rings are rubbing against the files on the cylinder walls and they're seating themselves. I don't really understand what that means, but they have to work themselves into each other and seal themselves together. They got to get to know each other, them parts, I guess. And so what happens is, from this old break-in thing, there's going to be metal in the oil. There's always some metal in the oil. It's normal wear, but there's going to be some extra metal in there. I'm going to run it for 200 miles and then change it and call it good. And I'm going to vary the speeds for 200 miles, which after that, I will begin to ride it normally, but I'll ride it easily. So back to Harley's idea of cleaning out the oil tank. They want you to get all the old metal out. Well, this tank was cleaned not that long ago. When I put this motor in, I cleaned it out. Now, you can tell if it's got sludge in it by draining it, taking a flashlight, and looking down in it. At least you can on these old ones. And what happens is they'll get sludge in them that has a lot of metal in them. And so I've taken them off and cleaned them out and gotten a lot of shiny stuff out of them. So when you're changing a motor or doing a top end, especially if it's been a long time, you want to clean the oil tank, which is a big fucking pain in the ass, and at least run oil through your oil lines. And so that's what I'm going to do for break-in on it. But for right now, let's just see if this thing's going to start. I'm going to run it for a minute or so if it does, and then shut it off and put a fan on it. Okay, let's see what happens. Give it a little choke here, huh? Turn on some gas. Little ignition. Let's see if it fires up. Okay, now, besides your basic ratchets and wrenches, we're going to have a look at what tools, specialty tools maybe, that I would need to do this job that I couldn't do it without. Let's take a look. Okay, you got to have a torque wrench for torquing them head bolts on. Pretty common tool. You got to have a valve spring compressor. If you're going to take those valves out, that's probably the most uncommon one for the average person to have. And you got to have this suction cup and lapping compound. I think this is auto parts stuff. As for the valve spring compressor, you don't have to have that because you can do it with a big wide hose clamp. I've done it before. I know it can be done. And that's really all you need, aside from wrenches and hand tools. That's about it. For a job that costs $3,000, I did this one for probably 200 bucks. Maybe $3, you include the oil change or whatever. So the obvious question that I would be asking if I was you, and of course I was wondering about it the whole time I was doing this job, is did the work I do really pay off? Did the bike stop using oil? Well, I did this job back in the spring and it is now the fall. And the ride from where I did the work at in North Carolina to Sturgis was an 1,800 mile ride. And over the course of that ride, the bike used a half a quart. And it has used very little oil since then. I've rarely had to put oil in it. Now, it hasn't stopped using oil completely, but I do have that one loose exhaust valve guide. And if I would have wanted to make the whole thing right, see, after checking everything, I knew it didn't need a top end. But if I wanted to make everything right, I would have taken that head in to a machinist and had him do that one valve. I just wasn't really in the position to be doing that at the time, but if I was, that's what I would have done. Now I'm going to tell you guys my best guess at what may have happened to make these oil rings collapse on this motor, because I had this problem happen once before, and I'll tell you about it in a minute. And from looking at the studs that I took out that were all crusty and just from the rings being collapsed, I have a feeling that at some point somebody may have overheated this motor really badly. Now, Evos don't tend to have a heat problem, probably because they don't make a whole lot of power, and power makes heat. This is why you see in the later model motors they're having a problem with heat, right? So, but there are things that can go wrong that can cause my bike to get really hot. And I had one of those happen once, and the rear cylinder just started belching smoke. And I went and pulled it off, and the rings had done the same thing. I honed that one cylinder, I put in a new set of rings on it, put it back in, and it fixed it completely. My experience with heat in the past is that when I have a problem that's causing my stuff to get too hot, it'll run for so long that way, and then something goes wrong in the top end. I've had it happen twice, maybe 3 times. So this is my best guess at, I think, what may have happened to this motor, because the motor's not even ready for a rebuild yet. Everything in it's pretty damn tight. So that's my best shot at what I think may have happened here. Now, as you may already know, I'm not only on this channel, I'm also on these 2 other free speech channels as well. Of these channels, not only am I there, but I hope that you guys will go over there and look around, and for any questions you have about anything that's going on, and see what you begin to learn. I said in the last video that mainstream worldwide is now controlled by the same people. You have to get away from it to learn anything. Anyway, with all that, you guys, I'll see you on the next video, which will not be about fixing motorcycles. It will be about riding them. So I'll look forward to seeing you there.